The devs just went over all of the changes to the damage buckets in Diablo 4, and this completely changes everything. Vulnerable, sell, crit damage, sell, and then basically your additives now are going to be where it's at. I'm going to show you an example because it was extremely confusing, and I'm already getting questions on what the damage looks like now. So the best way I could explain it, the best way I could show and visualize it is in Excel. So bear with me. I changed the color so it won't be too much of a flashbang. Okay, so what does damage look like now? Say you just deal 100 damage, you have 200% vulnerable, 150% crit damage, and your additive damage adds up to around 400%. On that base 100 damage, right now you are doing 3,750 damage, a multiple of 37.5. Here is the rough math. You can see because these are multiplicative buckets, they get multiplied together, 1 plus whatever the number is. So you have 100 times 3 times 2.5 times 5 to get your total damage output. Now, in the new world, vulnerable and critical damage only give you their base damage as a multiplicative. Now, if you don't know, you start out on your character with 20% vulnerable damage and 50% crit damage. So you don't even need these on your gear, on your stats. Anything additional to this, so anything you find as an affix on your gear is now going into the additive bucket. So crit damage and vulnerable damage are effectively the same as additive damage now. If you can get a higher additive damage, get it instead, because you're not always going to be attacking a vulnerable enemy. You're not always going to be attacking with a critical hit. There's no reason to get these anymore because there are extra stipulations on top where you can just get an additive damage and boost your additive damage regardless. So here you can see now with the same stats as before, we're only getting a benefit from 20% and 50% as our multiplicative, but we're adding the difference into our additive bucket. So before this was 350, now there's 70 that's still going towards the vulnerable and crit multiplicatives, but we're left with an extra 280% from the combined two that's going into our additive. This, with nothing else changed, once the new season starts, you're going to go from doing 3,700 damage to 1,400 damage. That's a decrease of 63% damage just from these changes alone if you change nothing about your build. Now, a lot of these additive damage buckets can get you a lot higher than crit and vulnerable could, especially with the changes that were done recently. So you're going to be able to stack your additive damage now, but there was also a change to overpower damage. Overpower as well is now. So if you just take out, and before we didn't really run any overpower, but now that we have it as a multiplicative, we're going to be putting in at least 50% overpower. So let's see now, what does it look like if we take 50% out of our additive bucket and put it into our overpower bucket? Here we have the example. So here we're dropping our additive from 680 to 630, and we're putting that 50% in overpower damage. Now, when all of these, of course, statuses are met, so you have to be attacking vulnerable, crit damage, and overpower all at the same time, your damage is now increased by 40% just by switching the damage bucket now from your additive to your overpower bucket. So this is how the new buckets work. There is no reason to get added vulnerable or crit damage unless it's going to provide you more damage than an additive bucket. And let's just look here at the additive bucket. So these were all of the additive damages, right, that we have. A lot of these you can actually guarantee uptime on. So something like percent damage, that's always going to work. You don't have to be attacking a vulnerable. You don't have to be attacking a critical hit in order to apply it. Now, those are still multiplicative buckets, so you're going to want to build that into your build, but you don't need to have the affix on any of your gear. If these affixes are more consistent and are going to roll for you, higher rolls than vulnerable and overpower and crit strike damage, then these are going to be what you want to go with for the new season once these changes take place. Now, certain builds, like damage over time builds, aren't really feeling this nerf as much. So all of you poison rogues out there, if you're not already, you're going to want to be after this video and after you understand the changes to the buckets. Poison rogues never used critical strike damage. Damage over time builds don't crit and don't use it. So effectively, they are not receiving nearly the nerf that every other build is. Poison, buy. Everything else, sell. Poison's where you're going to be. Damage over time builds where you're going to want to be in Season 2. And maybe throw on some overpowered damage while you're at it. So I hope that cleared things up. I'm really looking forward to updating my builds with all the new information that we got from the dev stream. So look out for that. Sub to the channel if you're not, to make sure you get those videos. And I'll see you in the next one.